So, as Richard said, I come at this from the radio perspective. That's my role at ITRON, and the security has come in via the RAD, as I'm going to give a quick overview now. So just to provide some caveats, I'm not really an expert on cybersecurity, so if you have any specific questions on cybersecurity, I'm probably going to hand you off to my colleagues. Also, I might not always be that complimentary about the standards as they stand at the moment. I was involved with it, but we, between the two of us, were trying to push them in the right direction. To be fair, the group that's been working on this has been working very hard, and it's pretty difficult, actually, to achieve what the Commission is asking them to do. So, moving on to the content. So what I'm going to talk about is, I believe Richard gave an introduction, he's already said, to the RED last year, so you are aware of that, but I'll give a quick update as to exactly what the RED is for those of you that are not familiar with it, and then focus in on the standards themselves, which, as Richard said, were delivered to the world in August of this year, look at the structure of the requirements quickly, and then come to conclusions and next steps. So, Radio Equipment Directive. So the Radio Equipment Directive came in 2014. It replaced the previous RTTE directive, which essentially set out for radio products how pretty much the transmitter should work. There were various changes to the RED. One of the main things that came in with the RED was the fact that there was requirements on the receivers themselves. There was an acknowledgement that if a communication link is going to work, if an ecosystem is going to work, then the receivers have to be of reasonable quality as well as the transmitters working properly too. So just going through the essential requirements themselves that are set out in the legislation, there are two main things, which is traditionally, or up until now, what all of the standards have been about. So health and safety, references to the low voltage directive to make sure the products are safe to use from a health and safety perspective, and also EMC, so to make sure that you're not producing noise either from the antenna or from the box or from the cables that you shouldn't do, and likewise, within reason, you can accept interference into those components as well. The main thing that I've spent my life working on for the past 10 years is the second one, efficient use of radio spectrum. So basically there are hundreds of standards which set out how individual radios should work. But anyway, moving quickly on from that, what we're interested in here is Article 3, which didn't come into power when the RAD came into power, but the European Commission has the power to be able to adopt delegated acts, to basically switch on bits of legislation that are in the RAD, and that's what it's been doing over the past couple of years. You may well be aware that the common charger port that's come in, that was switched on as part of the three within the Radio Equipment Directive. And what the Red Cyber stuff that has done is to basically switch on three sub-articles. D, which is internet-connected devices, so protecting the network. E, which is privacy and personal data, so making sure that for devices that are connected to the internet, that data is protected. And then fraud, for any radio devices or devices that have got radios in them that are used for financial transactions. So moving on very quickly, so the standards themselves here, as cybersecurity experts, you'll understand 5.1 to 5.14. I won't go into the detail of that. I haven't got time to do it. I've already said the standards are available from August 2024 from any good national standards bodies, but hopefully you'll use BSI. And there's a link to there if you want to go there afterwards. However, even though it's been voted on by the national standards committees. Unfortunately, the HAS consultant, who will be advising the European Commission as to the status of the standard, has given it a negative assessment. So it seems unlikely that the standards, unfortunately, in the current state, are likely to be cited. And for the reason that being cited is important is because if you have a cited standard, it's known as harmonised, and that means individual companies can, within their own company, do an assessment against that standard and say, yep, that works okay. Otherwise, the situation you'll have is people will have to go to notified bodies, and I'll come on to that in a moment. The standards are not easy to read, I'm afraid. We've got 5.1 and 5.2, that's the first 2 levels. It goes down to 6 levels of hierarchy in the standard. We've got the informative and the normative bits all mixed in with one another, so it's pretty difficult to read, which is a shame. Again, we try to advise them not to do that. So moving on to the structure of the requirements themselves. So each of those 14 requirements has a description of requirements which looks very much like the descriptions of the requirements that are in the IoTSF security framework. Also in there, we've got, against each or some of the requirements, we've got exceptions in there, so we've got the ability, if a particular company says, we don't think that actually this is applicable to us, they have the ability to opt out of that. Unfortunately, I know a lot of us that have been working on this believe that will probably be the death knell for the standards, because the Commission won't like the fact that manufacturers have so much flexibility. Each requirement generally is structured as applicability and appropriateness. So firstly, does one of those exceptions apply? And secondly, if it does apply, have you used the appropriate one? So moving on to the next bit, underneath each requirement is a rationale, so why that is in there in a bit more detail, and also some guidance as to what is meant. Well, actually, no, the rationale is what is meant. Guidance is how you can potentially comply with that, and that's worthwhile reading. The assessment criteria, these are normative, as is the requirement itself. So basically, for each requirement, it sets out the objective, which is basically a reference to the requirement number above, and then implementation categories. So coming late into the process, we had the idea that actually these are generic standards which apply across a large number of different types of products, and it simply wasn't possible for them to cover all of the different categories of devices, and so we put in there the idea of different implementation categories in there to hopefully give manufacturers a chance to be able to still comply with that, at the same time not having the European Commission say, no, that's too much flexibility. That's the knife edge that we've been walking. And then also lots of detail as to what required information is needed in the file that needs to be filled out to prove your compliance with this. Then assessment types. 3 types of assessment under each requirement. 1, a conceptual assessment, which is basically paperwork, and it's running through these decision trees. So basically, you run down through them, and when you're going through an applicability requirement, you come down and you'll either end up as it being applicable or a pass. Therefore, you would then move on to the appropriateness ones, and there will be a corresponding tree there where you'll end up with a pass, presumably if you're self-certifying this. Then you come to the functional completeness assessment, which essentially is you trying to prove a negative. So that's basically saying you believe that your product has all bases covered. So for example, when it comes to ports, I've covered all of the ports that are in there. If you're self-certifying, it's unlikely that you're going to say no there. But I think the reason that that's in there is because it is possible for a national authority to take your product, and they will be looking very closely at that sort of thing. So don't just dismiss it. Make sure you look at it. Make sure you get potentially a third-party laboratory to have a look at that to make sure you haven't missed something there. And then the third thing, functional sufficiency test, is to make sure that what you have said is in there in your paperwork is actually there in the laboratory. Then moving on to annexes, just quickly, there's a rationale, which is lots of information on trying to explain in a bit more detail how to use it. And then mappings. Richard has already talked about mappings of the RED into the IoTSF framework, but there were mappings to 62443, 303, 645, and CSIP, and then also mappings to the central requirements themselves. Moving on quickly, so conclusions and next steps. So the problem that we've got is that, as I've said, we've got radio standards coming together with security standards. One of the problems that we've got is the Commission believes that there should be a concept of a product that's absolutely secure. And as Richard has just pointed out, that's not possible. Generally, security buys you time. And that's one of the fundamental problems that we've had in talking to the Commission here. So will the standards get cited? I already answered that. I don't think they will. But they were only submitted to the Commission about 3 weeks ago, unfortunately. There was a bit of a cock-up there. And I suspect we probably won't have an answer on that until February of next year, which is simply too late. I've already talked about it being a generic standard. It's trying to cover a wide range of products. So to be fair to those of people that were trying to write these standards, it's really, really difficult to write a standard that applies across hundreds of different types of products. And also the scope isn't clear. So internet-connected product, what does that mean? The Commission won't tell us. It's in the legislation. They basically say it's up to the courts to decide. So we as an industry need to decide what we mean by that. The Cyber Resilience Act is coming on its heels, which has already talked about that. Complying with standards is complex and time-consuming. You need to talk to one another about this, get a hold of one of the copies of the standards and talk about that, talk to notified bodies and engage a notified body now, because I think there's a serious danger that come August 2025, there will be no cited standards. So you really do need to talk to notified bodies. I hope I haven't overrun. I'll leave it with you. Thank you.
Just before...